When it comes to gacha games, the most frustrating part can oftentimes be the gear. Days of grinding, multiple layers of RNG, and disappointing results are the name of the game. We've seen this mechanic present across many titles, specifically the most popular in the genre, and it's always a huge pain point among players. When your gear, or oftentimes lack of gear, is the biggest factor separating you from the ability to clear endgame content, your power getting determined by the roll of a dice can create some amazing highs, but also some devastating lows. But because of that, it's also one of the main goals that can keep a player coming back to the game, a huge motivator for daily logins and an active player base, which is a metric that many gacha games base their success on. When it comes to Wuthering Waves, Kuro's implementation of equipment, echoes, are easily one of the most player-friendly implementations in existence. And based off the average level of progress we've seen across rosters, those tenured from prior gacha titles could say it's even too player-friendly. There's a reason why there's been such a high influx of posts talking about how there's nothing to do in Wuthering Waves, specifically as players headed into the latter half of version 1.2. That's because Kuro, in their process of listening to players, streamlined the gearing for every character, making ideal pieces far easier to achieve while still creating room for insane god rolls. It's a system that has its own set of flaws, sure, but many of those flaws are the result of the horrifying conditioning gacha players have gone through over the past few years. When you've been suffering, sometimes you don't know when you're getting saved. Today, we'll be diving into how this is the case, breaking down why the ecosystem is a fantastic player experience, why you're able to gear Wuthering Waves characters so much faster than other games, and how this speed and player friendliness is being seen as a problem rather than a benefit by some parts of the player base. As always, if you're enjoying this content, please hit that like and subscribe button. The ecosystem at the launch of Wuthering Waves didn't have the best reputation, with the insanely early availability of endgame gold echoes dropping from mobs as early as databank level 15 or union level 30. For a lot of players, that was close to a week's worth of playtime. The early availability of endgame equipment and the lack of upgrade materials at those levels meant that many players formed the impression that echoes took a long time to grind. And despite the fact that Kuro has acted directly on this feedback by reducing credit costs and showering the player base with an absurd amount of tubes and tuners, there are still some players who insist that this system is bad, even citing that it's worse than the artifact system of Genshin or the relic system of Honkai. The fact of the matter is that echoes are a far superior system, primarily because of what the definition of a good roll in Wuwa is. For many characters, specifically DPS ones, an echo rocking a crit rate and a crit damage substat, or just 2 out of your 5 potential rolls, will typically work just fine for any player looking to clear endgame content. When you can't roll the same substat on a single piece of equipment multiple times, this severely limits the maximum potential of a piece, but also mitigates a lot of the bad outcomes. With that said, there are still god rolls in Wuthering Waves, like a perfect piece consisting of crit rate and damage, 2 attack subs, and energy regeneration, but there's absolutely no content in the game that warrants this level of perfection across every piece. What this means is that you always have something to grind for if you're seeking that perfection, while fantastic performance is still widely accessible to the player base. This is because when you roll a piece with crit rate and crit damage as one of the first few rolls, you know that piece is going to be usable, regardless of what happens to the others, and you still have the potential to roll those desired stats as one of the last few upgrades as well, giving any piece the potential to be great. This is a far cry from other top gacha titles, where oftentimes you don't even get the opportunity to roll on a piece at all. You could spend days, weeks, or months grinding a domain. The fact of the matter is that if your desired substats aren't on the gear when it drops, you don't have anything to spend your resources on in the first place. And when you do get something that you can actually start leveling, and then it starts rolling badly, the piece that you have potentially been waiting weeks for is dead, and you have no idea when you'll enter the upgrade menu ever again. It's all up to RNG. This problem doesn't exist in Wuwa. There's a reason why players are constantly complaining about the lack of experience tubes or tuners. It's because players always have something to spend them on. If a piece rolls badly, you can then call it quits, open the codex, and start farming mobs or claiming event rewards until you can give the roulette another spin. Many view the hidden nature of substats as a negative. They say they hate leveling a piece and finding out it's garbage. But that also means that a piece that's garbage can turn amazing. The alternative is never leveling a piece at all because you simply don't get lucky on the drop. There is a reason why in Genshin or Honkai you can farm for a single character for over a year and still not have a full set. And there's a reason why people never complain about experience materials in those games. It's because you never have anything to spend them on. In Wuthering Waves, the only barrier you have when it comes to leveling equipment in the first place is the main stat of the Echo. And when the options of a main stat for 1 and 4 costs are extremely limited, and we've been showered with countless morphable echoes for 3 costs, the harsh reality is that this massive increase in available levelable echoes and the far more acceptable range of substats means that gearing characters in WoWA takes far less time. That player friendliness, however, can be a double-edged sword, primarily because of how much player unfriendliness in the gear grind can artificially inflate playtime. The harder it is for a player to grind something, the more they'll grind for it. And for many players, the daily domain run is one of the only reasons why they even log into Genshin or Honkai Star Rail. Your progression in those games is completely tied to your energy, while in Wuthering Waves, it's tied to your experience in tuners. And when Kuro started giving out an insane number of these tubes and tuners across every event, that meant that players were able to make an absurd amount of progression across their characters that's resulted in far less motivation to partake in activities like echo grinding or tacit fields, especially if you're at the point where your characters have acceptable builds that can tackle endgame content. What this ultimately means is that Wuthering Waves, despite the fact that you can infinitely farm overworld monsters for equipment, is actually one of the least grindy games in the gacha genre. It's the game that respects your time the most, but in turn, that means you don't have to spend as much time in-game. When players have conditioned themselves towards spending a majority of their daily playtime on grinding gear that is, in 95% of cases, complete garbage, streamlining that experience means they'll feel like there's less to do on a daily basis. It's a bit like someone complaining that you've taken chores off their plate, but the psychological conditioning from years of Hoyoverse games can be hard to break. Echoes are good, some could say even too good, with how easy it is to build characters. But one thing that's clear is that Kuro Games is a company that respects your time. It's up to you what you do with those savings. As always, if you enjoyed this content, please hit that like and subscribe button. Peace out.